So Anne, please go ahead.
Okay.
Everybody, yes.
So today's presentation is energy security in Ukraine, and we have two speakers today, professors. One is with the University of Maryland. Anna Alberini, I'm sorry, is a professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics. She is an energy economist and an environmental economist. Her energy economics research focuses on residential energy demand, energy efficiency decisions, and consequences of such decisions, policies targeted at shaping residential energy demand, and on vehicle fuel economy and driving decisions. She currently teaches PhD level econometrics in an undergraduate course on the economics of climate change and supervises numerous graduate and undergraduate research projects. She received her PhD in economics from the University of California in San Diego. Anna is a member of the editorial board of the Energy Journal, the International Advisory Board of Energy Policy, an associate editor of Energy Efficiency, and she is also chair of the American Statistical Association's Advisory Committee to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. And she has also served 2 stints on the United States Environmental Protection Agency's Science Advisory Board in Environmental Economics. Dr. Iryna Sotnyk is a doctor in economics and professor and deputy head of the Department of Economics, Entrepreneurship, and Business Administration at Sumy State University in Ukraine. She is a Fulbright alumna, fellow of the scholarships of the Cabinet of Ministers and the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, as well as Latvian State Research Scholarship Program. Professor Sotnyk had professional training in Israel, Lithuania, Latvia, and the US, Estonia, and the Czech Republic. She is the author of more than 200 publications. 22 are indexed by Scopus or Web of Science related to sustainable development, economic issues of energy and resource saving, renewable energy, green and energy economics. Dr. Sotnyk leads 9 research projects, including 4 grants of the President of Ukraine, and a contributor of more than 25 research projects, including international ones. I'd like to welcome you to this Zoom webinar, and if they would like to start.
Very well, so I guess I will start. So give me 1 second to share my screen and get organized here. 1 second. And can you guys see my screen at all? Oh, somebody.
Yes.
Perfect. So now the only thing that I have to do is get started with my presentation. And remember that I shouldn't touch the screen because as soon as I do, stuff freezes. So hopefully I'll be okay. So Control L. Uh-oh, really? Okay, can you see this okay now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So sorry for the slowness with which I start today. I'm going to take 1 more second to do a little bit of housekeeping type of information here. First of all, if you have any questions, please unmute yourself and ask me questions as I go because I cannot read the chat as I'm doing this presentation. Secondly, this is something that I have to say every single time I do a presentation from home or a webinar or a class from home. I live next to a fire station, which means that all the time, all day, there's ambulances and fire engines going down the street, going down Connecticut Avenue just outside of my window. If there's a lot of noise and the sirens are very loud, I will mute myself for a few seconds until they're going away. The good news is they're not coming to get you. They're not coming to get me either, hopefully. And so we should be able to continue. So thank you for joining us today. This is really an honor for me. And in fact, I would like to start my presentation, which of course is already freezing. Okay, you guys, give me 1 second to get out of this, stop the sharing, get started again, because I'm having a problem with that. So let me close this presentation and start it over. And I apologize profusely, but unfortunately, I'm well acquainted with this issue, which happened even the other day when I was giving a keynote speech at a conference. So let me see if I can now get myself back on Zoom. Are you guys seeing my screen? I can't remember if I did the share or not.
Right now, no.
Okay, and yeah, sorry about this, you guys. I'm gonna try it now. And hope that you guys can see it.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, but it's still not advancing. Oh yeah, okay, now it finally is. So let me go in presentation mode and keep my fingers crossed. I would like to start my presentation today with actually thanking the scholars from Ukraine that have been frequent visitors to my department and to the college. And 2 people entered the waiting room. So can you guys let them in, or should I do this? Okay, let me do this real quick as we talk. Here we go.
Anna, I don't have permission, I don't think, to let them in.
Okay, then
I will do it, okay?
okay. Iryna, can you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, you guys.
I'll
We
let
seem
them
like we're going through a lot of interruptions here, but hopefully we can get started. Okay, so I would like to thank Olga Kimmich, who is a PhD candidate at Charles University in Prague, but is a Ukrainian national. Her hometown is Uzhhorod, and she has been working with me and writing papers with me about residential energy demand. We were lucky to have Professor Sotnyk visit our department from September 2019 to February 2020, and then of course, the pandemic started, unfortunately. And she's an expert on renewable energy. She will be conducting the second part of this webinar. And just prior to the beginning of the invasion, we were in conversation with Professor Daniil Gulak, who's a colleague of Iryna's. He was in the process of applying to be able to visit us, but of course then, the invasion started. He is interested in an expert in transportation and electric vehicles, which is a very important topic nowadays. So I'm sorry to inform you guys that unfortunately I see, okay, now I know what I need to do. I need to touch the screen. So this presentation is going to be about energy security. So what does energy security mean? So I'm borrowing an expression or a definition from the International Energy Agency, which calls energy security the same as security of supply. That means availability of a regular supply of energy at an affordable price. It isn't just enough that you can get to the energy, that you can receive the energy and the fuels that you need. You need to be able to receive them, to buy them at a reasonable price so that you can run your economy, conduct your business, and all this kind of stuff. So the people that focus their research and their policy analysis on energy security like to offer a couple of different definitions of aspects of energy security. So for example, we can talk about dependency, which means how much an economy relies on sources of energy that are not necessarily under its control. And so for example, energy imports. They also like to talk about vulnerability, which describes essentially the likelihood that there is a domestic disruption in case some external energy source is reduced or cut off completely. So what are possible threats to energy security, keeping these definitions in mind? Okay, so if a country depends very heavily on importing the energy that it needs, then we can imagine that it exposes itself to potential threats to energy security. If there's little diversification of energy imports, and so if a country is essentially importing all of its or much of its energy needs from a single country or very, very few countries, that also is a potential threat to energy security. If the GDP is very energy intensive, then you can imagine how much of a disruption there's going to be to the GDP if for some reason access to energy becomes very difficult or very expensive. If a high share of electricity generation is based on imported fuel out of the total electricity generation, that's also a situation where energy security could get compromised. If there's little diversification of energy sources and fuels, so all of the energy is coming from just oil or just natural gas, that also can potentially compromise energy security. And if the generation of electricity, for example, is very, very concentrated, which means one or very few power plants are serving the entire country, that can also compromise potentially energy security. And not just, to outside actors, just like, Russia or another hostile country, but also to domestic terrorism, for example, or international terrorism. So I'd like to offer you, so I assume that some of the people in the audience are going to be economists or people with quantitative type of training. And so I would like to offer you a possible index that you can use if you want to see how well diversified the imports of a particular nation are, or how well diversified the generation of electricity is in a particular country. So this is what we call the Shannon-Weiner Index of Diversification. Which actually gets borrowed from the literature on biological, and ecological type of diversity. So you can see the formula here. So we're taking the share of the imports, for example, into Ukraine that are coming from country I, and we're multiplying that by the log of that share, and then we're adding over all of the possible countries. So you can imagine what's going to happen to the index if one country is importing all of its energy from a single country. Like imagine a country that is importing everything from Russia. Then N is equal to 1. X sub I is equal to 100%, so it's equal to 1. We multiply that by the log of 1, which is 0. And so we get a result of 0, which means that we have absolutely no diversification here. You can increase, of course, the diversification by increasing the number of countries and making sure that each country is contributing to just a relatively small share. So here, the greatest level of diversification would happen if you have a large number of countries and every one of them is contributing just a small share. So I have taken the liberty, since I know that this is technically supposed to be a class, I've taken the liberty of actually writing a few homework problems if you're interested in this particular topic. So I asked you to calculate the Shannon-Weiner index for a single country, 2 countries, 3 countries, and so forth, up to 10 countries from where the imports are coming, assuming a completely even share. So if you have 2 countries, the shares are 50% and 50%. If it's 3, 33%, 33%, 33%, and so forth. Then I'm going to ask you to calculate the Shannon-Weiner index for Italy, and you will see where Italy in 2020 imported its natural gas. As you can see, Russia was accounting for a very significant share, pretty much a third of this. And I'm going to show you just briefly, I'm going to give you the preview of the solution to problem 1. So this is the problem in which you are to calculate the index, the Shannon-Weiner index, assuming completely even shares, by the different countries. If you have a single country, as you can see, intuition suggests, and the math confirms, that you have 0, the index is 0. So you have 0 diversification, which of course makes you very vulnerable if there is a threat to the imports coming from this particular country. The diversification index increases as you increase the number of countries, which of course makes the share smaller and smaller. And so by the time you are diversifying, you're using 10 countries and each of them is contributing the same share, you can see that you're getting the highest possible value of the index. And it could continue forward in this direction if you are allowing for more countries. So I hope that you guys can see that when the index is 0, that means that all of your energy is coming from a single country, which means you have very little, practically 0 energy security in the event of a disruption. As you're increasing the number of countries, you're getting a bigger and bigger value, and a bigger value means that you're more diversified, and so that's a better situation from the point of view of energy security. So based on the information and the definitions that are given, so let me do this. Let's try to evaluate a little bit what the energy security situation in Ukraine is. So you guys probably know this much better than I do. I've actually never been to Ukraine, and I was hoping to be able to visit this year after the pandemic and everything, but Mr. Putin has decided otherwise. So you guys probably know that Ukraine actually has deposits of oil, natural gas, and coal. So it covers all of the possible. It has all of the possible fossil fuels that it could potentially need, but not enough to meet the demand. So it covers about 2/3, so about 65% of the total energy demand using domestic production. The sector that does probably the best is the sector of electricity. There's a lot of nuclear power being generated in Ukraine. So over 50% of the electricity is actually coming from nuclear power stations. You guys know fairly well, and most of the world has learned, through the media, through television, through the news effectively, that actually, excuse me while I'm letting these people join, that in Zaporizhzhia, you have there's the largest nuclear power station in Europe. And so, and there's several nuclear power stations in Ukraine, which means that Ukraine really does get a significant amount, a large share of its electricity from nuclear power. Generally speaking, the energy mix in Ukraine is well diversified in the sense that no particular source of energy, no particular fuel gets more than maybe 25–30% of the total, which is a good thing. The largest final energy consumers are industry, and in second place, we have households and the residential sector. Households and the residential sector are probably number one when it comes to natural gas consumption. So they use it to heat their home, to heat their water directly. So they receive it from pipelines, and then they have boilers at home, and and water heaters that are using natural gas, or they use it indirectly in the sense that there's about 20–30% of the households in Ukraine are using district heating, and district heating for the most part actually uses natural gas to the various district heating companies are using natural gas to generate heat, which of course gets funneled through pipes through the final destination, which are the homes of people. Generally speaking, Ukraine has a reputation for being a country with a high energy intensity, and it has a very large, a relatively large and inefficient, and this is the reputation that they have, which I hope will improve in the future, for using inefficiently energy, despite the fact that much of the energy that they need needs to be imported from someplace else. I have old data coming from the International Energy Agency as far as renewables. So in 2018, the renewables are accounting for about 5% of the total energy mix, but Iryna Sotnyk will provide you with more recent information about that indicates that actually the share has increased significantly prior, of course, to the beginning of the war. For those that are interested in climate change, as I am, of course, actually, Ukraine does have a carbon tax. It's a fairly small carbon tax in the sense that the rate is very low. It's significantly below the $25 to $40 per metric ton of CO2 that is recommended by international organization. It's only 10 Iryna, which corresponds to about 40 cents. 40 cents of the dollar. So that's definitely a very, very small number. And it's limited to stationary sources that are emitting more than 500 tons each year. Okay, so now I've learned the trick. I need to touch the screen and then advance. So we were saying that, we were presenting a little bit of a picture about Ukraine's energy. Let's look at the supply. So energy does come heavily from abroad through imports into Ukraine. So Ukraine depends for 83% on imports for its oil consumption. 33% of its natural gas consumption must come from someplace else. And 50% of its coal consumption also comes from different countries. Even though, as I was saying, Ukraine is actually hydrocarbon rich. So there's resources of natural gas and some oil in the Carpathian region in the west, in the Dnipro-Donetsk region in the east, and in the Black Sea and the Azov Sea. There's also coal in the east, in the Lviv and the Volyn region, which extends into Poland, and in the Dnieper Basin in central Ukraine. The coal in the Donbass, you guys are very familiar with this, but that's the deposits that are closer to the surface and could be extracted more easily. They've been fairly depleted. And unfortunately, the infrastructure that would take the coal from this area into other parts of Ukraine has been pretty much destroyed already since the events of 2014. So this is something that is not particularly easy for Ukraine to access. I would like to talk a little bit about natural gas in Ukraine, because Ukraine actually plays a very important role in transmitting and allowing natural gas that is coming from Russia to go through Europe. So historically, Ukraine has had a lot of pipeline infrastructure, which it inherited from Soviet times. It's been historically a natural gas transit type of country. So as you can see in this picture, there's different intakes of the pipes that are going through Ukraine, and then from Ukraine, they go into Slovakia, and then they get dispatched, through the natural gas goes through other countries, including Italy. It turns out, the country that I was born and raised in. Because of the presence of this infrastructure, Ukraine has had considerable transit revenues, and for the longest time was actually able to get natural gas at a relatively cheap price. But then stuff happened. So over time, Russia has been cutting the volume that goes of natural gas that goes through Ukraine, and it's been shifting this volume in favor of other pipelines, including the Yamal Europe, which goes through Belarus. Surprise, surprise there. In addition, Russia a number of times has completely suspended the delivery of natural gas, which has caused a number of complications to Ukraine. After 2014, after the events in eastern Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea, Russia actually stopped completely the gas that was supposed to go to Ukraine. And so Ukraine has had to essentially get the gas that is supposed to Europe, which it gets to keep, but it technically doesn't purchase that directly from Russia. So I was mentioning earlier the different pipelines that are going from Russia to the European countries. So I was mentioning the ones that are going through Ukraine, which you see right here. The Yamal Europe is this one, which goes through Belarus and then actually bifurcates into two parts. One part goes through Poland and then eventually winds up in Germany. Another part actually goes into Ukraine, where it joins existing infrastructure that goes through Slovakia and then feeds different countries, including, Slovenia, Croatia, and others. Now, you guys may have heard of the Nord Stream pipeline. So it turns out that the Nord Stream pipeline became effective around 2011. It's the one that essentially brings all of the natural gas to Germany and to some of the Baltic countries. It turns out that actually I've discovered this only recently through an article in the New York Times. Apparently, the Russians and Putin has been able to persuade the Germans that they really needed this Nord Stream pipeline because Kiev was withholding gas from going to Germany. So they were able to get this done and constructed. And as you guys may have heard, there was supposed to be a second twin, so literally a second pipeline that is literally on top of this one, of the Nord Stream, and that would have been Nord Stream 2. But when the invasion started, Germany decided that this project is not going to go ahead and essentially canceled it. And so for right now, we're staying with the existing pipelines that you see right here. So this is something that I wish I'd been able to update. I only have data that are up to the 1st of March of this year. So it covers just a week effectively after the invasion started. These data are coming from the Oxford Institute for Energy Study, and they're showing the volume of gas that is being sent to Europe through different pipelines. Some of these pipelines are coming from Europe itself. So they're coming from Norway. And Norway actually has been pretty consistent in its deliveries to Europe. Actually, if you were thinking about the trend here, the trend has been going up a little bit. Other pipelines have shipped consistently. This is a pipeline from North Africa, so we're talking about one that goes, I believe, from Algeria to Europe, especially to Italy. Italy purchases gas from Algeria, among other places. The one from Azerbaijan, which is also a very important supplier of natural gas, has also been relatively stable. You can probably focus on the shipments from Russia. You can see that they actually have bigger fluctuations than the other pipelines. And you can actually probably notice that the shipments dropped dramatically at the beginning of 2022, well before the invasion started. And after the invasion started, they actually didn't necessarily stop. And in fact, they picked up volume a little bit right after the invasion, which is kind of interesting and tells you, this is probably news that you know already, but it tells you a little bit of what's going on when it comes to the pipeline. This is the same type of story, but differentiating between essentially looking at the flows that are based primarily on long-term type of contracts. And you can see that the Nord Stream has been fairly consistent in the quantities that are shipped to Europe. Ukraine has seen a little bit of a drop just before and in, just about at the time of the invasion, but then it picked up again. And you can probably also notice that the Yamal pipeline, so the one that goes through Belarus, actually dropped in volume at the beginning of the year and before the invasion, and hasn't been, at least, up to the time of this particular data, so until March, hasn't really picked up steam at all, so to speak. All right, so here's a little bit of a history of the disruption to the supply of natural gas to Ukraine. So we can start back in time. So already in 2006 and 2008, Russia interrupted the shipments of natural gas to Ukraine in midwinter. And they actually resumed them later simply because they were afraid of losing their European markets. Something that I need to tell you is that in addition to having a very an excellent system, an excellent infrastructure when it comes to the pipelines for natural gas, Ukraine actually has a lot of storage capacity, which is very, very important because this is what happens when in the market for natural gas. You just don't get the gas that you're going to be using today from the pipelines. It generally goes to these storage facilities. And these facilities actually stock up, generally in the summer when people don't use gas as much because they don't have to heat their homes. And then, of course, they get depleted a little bit in the winter. What people are observing now is that pretty much everywhere in Europe, these stocks are depleting really, really fast, which is a concern. Although there is some comfort into knowing that we're going into the summer and not yet into the winter. But Ukraine has a very good stocking, storage type of infrastructure, which is really important. And that's probably what kept them going at these times. I don't need to tell you what happened in 2014. You guys know already about the different events, both international with Russia, but also domestically. And this was the time that the natural gas shipments to Ukraine really dropped dramatically, which left Ukraine, sort of scampering to find a way of getting gas, as I said, by way of Europe. At the same time, Ukraine also got some very important loans from the IMF and from the World Bank. And some of the conditions for the loans for this financial assistance was that Ukraine bring itself up to the same level of natural gas prices as, the international, as you would see on the international market, which implied tremendous increases in the price of natural gas, which, as we will discuss in just a few minutes, the household really had to bear the brunt of. Well, I don't need to tell you what happened on the 22nd of February. Just recent news, apparently the operator of the transmission pipelines said that they would suspend the gas shipments from Russia that are transiting via Ukraine to Europe from a particular transit point because of the Russians and the war operations were making it impossible to continue this. So we will stay tuned on that one, and we're hoping to find out a little bit more of what's going on. Maybe you guys know a little bit more than I do what's going on, depending pretty much on the news that we receive. So let's do a little bit of an analysis of the natural gas, infrastructure in Ukraine, and let's look at this. This is a little bit of a description, but also looking at the optic of energy security. So if you see a positive sign, which is in green, that's a good thing. That means that energy security is aided by this particular feature. If you see a negative sign in parentheses in red, that's a bad thing. So this particular situation is compromising energy security. It's certainly not helping it. So I was saying earlier that Ukraine, thanks to the sort of inheritance from Soviet times, has a very good gas transportation system with lots of primary and secondary pipelines, which means that in the event of accidents or disruption, it has the ability to reroute the gas, through a different route, without suffering much. It also has major storage facilities, which, as I was saying, really help, smooth out the consumption of gas, over time. Transmission losses on the main pipelines are really, really low. So that's another really good thing. That's another way of saying that the condition of this infrastructure is actually very good. Not so good when it comes to the district heating infrastructure. And remember that there's 20 to 30% of the population that is still served by district heating, especially if they lived in the cities, especially if they live in big buildings with lots of apartments. So the general perception by the International Energy Agency and observers and experts in this area is that this is a very dilapidated type of infrastructure with outdated technology and in poor state of repair. Something that is important is that in 2019, in Ukraine, a new energy efficiency fund program was started. This is a program that had a lot of participants in the sense that some financing was provided by the World Bank, some financing from the European Bank for Reconstruction. I don't remember the exact name, but that's essentially the European equivalent of the World Bank. And actually, this particular funding program, which is directed to residential buildings, as long as they are big buildings with lots of apartments, and to municipality, could actually provide funding for improving the efficiency of the pipelines that are used for district heating. It could also be used for improving the efficiency and the condition of the gas distribution to the consumers. So that's important. Another piece of information that tells you about the difficulty for Ukraine to develop its own supplies of natural gas is that some offshore and Donbas-based projects that had originally attracted interest on the part of international investors and multinational companies eventually had to be halted or scratched completely because of the events, in 2014 and the subsequent loss of territory to Russia and the ongoing conflict in the Donbas areas. Okay, here we go. So I know that we received an email, I believe, from Vitali that was complaining how difficult it is to get gasoline right now. So petrol, as the British will say, excuse me, in Ukraine. So Ukraine actually depends fairly heavily, not just on imports of oil, but also of imports of refined products, which means on gasoline, ready to be put into people's cars. Much of it comes from, like a good 50% comes from Belarus. And so that's not a good situation from the point of view of energy security. Belarus is not exactly being a friend of Ukraine right now. Something that I would like to point out is that actually the entire world is experiencing difficulties with with oil and with gasoline. The prices are going up. I can show you what's going on in the United States, for example. Prices this high, as you can see, as of the other day, were only seen before in 2008 and in 2009, when actually there was a big recession. You can see that at that time, the prices had been going up on the world oil market, and then they came crashing down because of the recession, which generally implies diminished demand for oil. So we are in the situation right now in which we're actually exceeding the level of prices then. So we will see what happens, but this is a problem that is common all over the world. You can actually take a look at the spot prices of Brent. So Brent is the sort of the European type of oil that comes from Norway and is relatively light. WTI stands for the West Texas Intermediate, which is a different type of oil that is used as a yardstick essentially in the United States. Clearly, the two of them track each other very, very well. But you can also see that starting in January of 2019, first, the prices came crashing down at the beginning of the COVID pandemic and with the associated lockdowns. It actually, at some point, the spot prices were actually negative, which means somebody would pay you if you are willing to take a barrel of oil. And then, of course, with reopening of the economy and everything, they have started to rise, and they're continuing to rise. And this is the story that we see just, in the last few days. So the point is that everybody's experiencing problem. Diesel is particularly expensive and difficult to come by right now. We have a diesel car and we're horrified when we're looking at the prices at the gas station. One important question here is how can the West diversify the supply? So keep in mind that there are quite a bit of imports of oil from Russia that are going to Europe. The United States doesn't really get oil from Russia, so it's kind of protected from the particular end of the story. But it's clear that if Russia gets through the sanctions cut off, from the world supply, we're going to have to find some other supplier. And this is where things are fairly interesting, because Saudi Arabia, which is the country that has the largest proven resources of, actually no, Venezuela is the one that has the largest reserves of oil, although some people think that they're overstated, that's not necessarily true. So Venezuela and Saudi Arabia are, countries that would be natural candidates for filling in the void that is left by Russia. But Saudi Arabia hasn't invested that much into development of new oil and extraction lately. So that's interesting. One of the reasons why they were doing that is because they realized that the world is interested more and more into going into renewables and using fossil fuel less. So it's unclear whether Saudi Arabia can step up the pace and really deliver a lot of oil a lot more oil to the market right now. People have been talking about, bringing back Iran, which is still a big producer, but of course is hit by sanctions. And they've been talking about Venezuela, which is a big producer, but it's also hit by sanctions by the United States. And also people talk about the fact that the crude from Venezuela is not that, doesn't match the refining facilities of the United States very well for the particular composition and the particular texture that it has. So all of these are things that are going on right now. I wanted to show you this, this little graph because I'm trying to make a little bit of sense of what's going on in the market for fossil fuels like natural gas and oil. So this is a graph that I show to my undergraduate students in my class, but excuse me while I'm letting people join here. And it's kind of interesting. So I have the quantity demanded on the x-axis and the price paid on the vertical axis. So I'm tracing out here in blue what would be the original demand function for fossil fuel. It's downward sloped because this is a demand function. And so I'm assuming there's many economists in the audience that will realize this is a legitimate demand function. Actually, this is an inverse demand function if we wanted to be technical. This is the original supply function. So we know that the supply function is generally positive sloped, and that's definitely the case with fossil fuels because production of certain non-conventional type of oil or gas, so fracking or shale oil and that kind of stuff, or tar sands and that kind of stuff generally happens because of the higher cost of accessing these resources only when the prices are sufficiently high. So this is effectively the intersection of the demand and supply. And so this would be the original quantity consumed, bought and sold in the market, and this would be the original price. But imagine that now people are becoming more and more interested in renewables so that their supply, the original supply, is actually now lower. That means that for every single quantity that I want to take into account, they're now willing to pay less because they're much more interested in investing and getting energy from renewables. So I'm shifting down the demand function. And so if the supply stayed the same, clearly the new equilibrium is going to be at lesser quantity demand and lower price. Now, what are the possible responses strategic responses by the oil producing countries? Well, one thing that they can do is do nothing. Another thing that they could do, and it's been observed in some circumstances, is to flood the market. So this is what you can see here with the orange dashed line. Flooding the market means that they're bringing more oil or more natural gas to the market for at any level of price, so that the supplier effectively getting the same quantity is now going to be costing less. So if that were the case, we would have a situation in which the new demand function actually intersect the new supply function, potentially, even with a larger quantity consumed. And so this is essentially a little bit of what I call one of the consequences of the green paradox, that by flooding the market, they secure that the price comes down and that people demand and use more than before. Now, another possible reaction could be the reaction that I believe Russia may be doing right now, may be engaging in right now. It's shrinking the supply through war or through some other action so that the supply function is moving towards the left. And so the intersection with the demand function, with the new demand function, is going to be at a lesser quantity, but much higher price. And so this is telling you how much this war and the strange conditions that the market is in, could be represented, with in a very schematic way that doesn't allow me to offer a lot of good predictions of what's going to be happening next, but at least it puts a little bit of structure to what we can expect the consequences to be. Okay, so I'm going to talk really briefly about some of my own research, and then I will let Iryna elaborate on renewables and also on programs that are supposed to be assisting families in making interventions in their homes so that they improve the energy efficiency of their home. I will be talking a little bit about energy assistance, which means helping the households pay for electricity and natural gas. So you guys probably know this already. Starting in about 2014 and especially in 2015, there have been substantial increases in the prices of electricity and natural gas to the households. So this is a graph that is actually showing up to a certain point, because this is taken from one of my own paper, and we had data until just about 2017. Is showing the increases in the prices of electricity in the different tiers that electricity is sold in. So consumers that consume the least quantity get a certain price, and that's the lowest possible line that you can see. The higher line are for the intermediate consumers, the ones that fall in the second, oops, sorry about that, you guys. The ones that fall in the second block of consumption, and this is for the heaviest consumers, so the ones whose consumption fall in the largest block. You can see that there have been substantial increases, although they were staggered in time, and they also were in different proportions for the different groups of heavy versus light consumers. So we've done a little bit of research on this with Olga Kimmich, and we investigated effectively to what was the response of consumers. So it turns out that actually consumers do pay attention in Ukraine, do pay attention to the prices. And one of the ways that you can see this is that they tend to concentrate, the demand tend to concentrate around the points at which there is a shift to a higher price. So this was 150 kilowatt hours per month, 200 kilowatt hours per month, and then 600 and 800 kilowatt hours per month, which were at different times the appropriate cutoff for all of these blocks. So you can see this quite clearly. We estimated the price elasticity to be -0.2 to -0.5, which is in line with expectation. Generally speaking, residential demand for electricity is not particularly elastic. It also reflects the fact that, for the most part, people don't use electricity in Ukraine to heat their homes. They use natural gas. And so if there's anything going on with natural gas, with the responses to prices, maybe we can take a good look at what happens with natural gas. By the way, you might want to compare the price elasticity in Ukraine with the price elasticity in the US, which is even smaller. So I think it's safe to say that Ukrainian consumers are more responsive to prices, and they tend to cut down their consumption more than Americans would do. So these were the prices of natural gas to households, starting in 2014 and then in 2015. And you can see how gigantic the price increases were, to the point that just within a few months, effectively, the prices had increased 700%. At least the nominal prices, because then, of course, this triggered huge increases in the cost of living. And so life in general became more expensive, if you wanted to buy just about anything. This stops at 2017, but the reality is that the price has been very relatively stable. It was raised to about 8.52 hryvnias per cubic meter in November of 2018. But then through the liberalization of the distribution market, it actually fell to just about 7 hryvnia per cubic meter, which is a great success. It shows you that through increasing competition, you're actually able to deliver gas to the consumers at even lower prices than the one that were under the government control previously, which is really great news. We were looking at the response of the consumers, which when the prices are increasing, which we found to be significant. The price elasticity of demand is about -0.16, so it is, again, relatively low, but it reflects the fact that the Ukrainian consumers are not wasteful to start with, and also don't have a lot of opportunities, especially in the city, to substitute other fuels for natural gas. We spent a lot of time actually investigating the role of the HUS, so the housing and the utilities subsidy, which is assistance that the Ukrainian consumers would receive from the government to help them pay their bills. We found that at least, originally, at least in the years between 2015 and, shall we say, 2019, actually households from all walks of life, so wealthier households as well as poorer households, were the recipient of this assistance, of course, not necessarily in the same amount. In 2019, and Iryna could probably speak to this a little bit, the the HUS, which was originally simply a discount on the final electricity bill. So the final electricity bill is 100, but you only pay 80. Became actually monetized, which means that people received cash for the HUS itself. There hasn't been, to my knowledge, a lot of research or assessment of the effect of this monetization. It would be interesting, and maybe Iryna can speak to that, to see if anybody has tried to see what kind of effect that had on Ukrainian consumers. Now, Ukrainian consumers are unfortunately often in a situation that we describe as fuel poverty. So we describe fuel poverty, we define it as the situation in which your expenses for energy, so for electricity, for natural gas, and for any fuels that you're using in your home is greater than 10% of income. And so fuel poverty is something that can affect people that are already poor to start with, but it can also happen when the government or the utilities are changing the price, maybe to bring them in line with the prices on the international market, and to remove subsidies, which is effectively what the IMF and the World Bank required Ukraine to do in 2015. So this is the percentage of the households that were they received the HUS, the assistance, in different amounts, of course, not necessarily in the same amount. But you can see that in 2017, over 50% of the households received assistance. In 2016 and in 2018, just under 50% of the households. So that's a huge percentage of the population. And you can imagine that this was very expensive for the government. In fact, at some point, this was costing about 2 to 2.5 to 4% of the GDP. So in this particular graph, you can actually get a little more information about the extent of fuel poverty in Ukraine. So we got data, this is work that I've done with Nitin Umapati at the World Bank. We got data from the household budget survey that is conducted in Ukraine every year. And we were just examining the expenditure on electricity, natural gas, any sort of fuels used by the household. So prior to, in 2014, and so prior to the big price increases that were experienced in 2015, the average expenditure by households that didn't receive assistance, energy assistance on fuel was about 5.5%, so shall we say 5.67%. If they received assistance, it was 5.91%. By 2016, the price increases were so high that if you don't receive assistance, the average household that didn't receive assistance was effectively household energy fuel poor. So you can see that the average person or the average family that didn't receive assistance was paying 11% of their income on fuel or energy or electricity, which essentially say the average person is in fuel poverty according to the international classification that is accepted by pretty much everyone. The receipt of the HUS of the assistant actually was able to reduce that percentage significantly. So that's telling you already it's giving you already a first indication that the HUS was really able to reduce fuel poverty quite a bit. So in fact, we calculated that the HUS was able to reduce the rate of fuel poverty by 1/2. It brought considerable consumer surplus gain equal to 6 or 7% of income. And I was saying at a price of 1 to 2.5% of the GDP. We also played, so Nitin Umapati and I played with some possible modification of the HUS, some as simple as cutting it in half, which actually would be a good proposition for the government because there's very, very little loss of consumer welfare for the consumer. But the government, of course, saves half of the budget that was previously dedicated to the HUS. This is because the consumers are not responding much to the price of electricity, but they're also not responding much to the HUS itself. So just because they're receiving government assistance, we found that they really didn't consume much more at all. So giving them assistance is helping them pay the bill, but it's not leading them to be wasteful with the use of energy. Something else that I wanted to talk about, but I will probably leave this for Iryna, is the warm loans program. So one of our calculations suggested that instead of giving every single winter a certain amount of money, or every single month a certain amount of money to households in the form of energy assistance, why don't we just give it once and we have the household apply this to the energy efficiency renovations that they do in their homes. So changing the boiler, putting insulation, changing the windows and everything. So we were doing some calculations that actually suggest that this would be a very helpful way and a very productive way, very efficient from the financial point of view for both the household as well as the government. I will let you read that because I think it's about time for me to stop. These are just some simple pictures of home renovations going on in the city of Uzhhorod. So these families were clearly applying insulation, and some of the ways in which we knew that they did was the fact that they had left the outside of the building colored in a different way. I will leave Iryna to continue her presentation and talk about, some of these programs. If I had to make any sort of predictions for what's going to happen next in Ukraine, is that, yes, energy assistance is probably going to be necessary to help the household, especially at a time in which the households are already going to be strapped, to pay for reconstruction, to get their jobs back and all this kind of stuff. I would recommend that energy assistance actually puts conditions on using energy assistance to improve the energy efficiency of home. That would be a strong recommendation. Reconstruction, of course, presumably is going to be incorporating more modern energy efficiency codes. And so that's already like a good recipe for success. Ukraine might want to consider electric heat. And so remember that electric heat can come in many ways, from heat pumps, through storage heat, which let you essentially store electric heat, from, in the middle of the night, and then you release it during the day. Ukraine could take advantage of the fact that much of its electricity is nuclear. So that's a plentiful, there's a plentiful generation of that. And nuclear in particular fits very well of this, storage heat story, in which you're storing heat, that is coming from electricity during the night. And of course, it's going to be super important for Ukraine to develop renewables, but that's exactly what Iryna is going to be talking about next. So I would like to thank you for your attention. You guys probably already have my PowerPoint presentation. There's some additional information that I haven't shown you, but it shows you effectively the reserves versus production for natural gas and oil for Russia and for other places in the world. It also shows you where the imports from Russia are going, but also shows you something that people are feeling a lot, people, observers, not necessarily me, but they are pointing out a lot, that while the reserves of other countries are increasing over time because these countries engage in exploration, the reserves of Russia are always the same because they don't have the funding and the technical ability to engage in exploration. So I will leave you guys, think about, the implications of this. But right now, I'm just going to stop. Thank you for your attention. And I'm happy to take questions, but maybe we can do questions after Iryna has done her presentation. I will let you guys decide about that.
And thank you. Maybe we will, we will have questions after maybe my presentation. Okay, I will try to share my screen. I think it's okay. Can you see it? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I will try to. No. Okay. So I'd like to present some information about state support mechanism to promote energy efficiency and renewable energy in Ukraine. And let's start from three possibilities for energy efficiency increasing in Ukraine for different business entities and populations. The first one is the state home loans program, and Anna talked about it. It's for the population and especially for owners of private houses. The next one is the ESCO mechanism, energy service contracts mechanism for public organizations that we have now. And the third is for industrial enterprises, and this is decarbonization fund, where we can use money for implementing energy efficiency measures. So as for the first possibility, state home loans program, as I said, it's for population. Here you can see the main results, the recent results of implementing this state program. So we have a lot of families participated in this program, and for the last 7 years, we have more than 800,000 families involved in this program. We have about 8.5 billion hryvnias invested in this program, involved money, to different energy efficient measures, and the amount of money compensated from the state and local budget, because we have, along with the state program, some local budget programs to support the population of different regions. So from the state budget, the compensation was about 3.3 billion hryvnias, and from the local budgets, about more than 500,000 hryvnias. And the annual energy savings that we reached, according to the implementing this program, is about 480 million cubic meters, or in gas equivalent. So every year we have these savings. Last year we have some news, some new additions to this program. Especially we have new equipment included to the list, which can participate in this program, and they were energy storage systems, electric chargers for electric cars, and smart electricity meters. Earlier, we have possibility only to implement energy efficient measures with such equipment as and materials such as energy saving or energy efficient windows, insulation materials, and so on. And last year we have a compensation of funds by our state, 20% for the solid fuel boilers and 35% for the energy efficiency measures. And also, except for the population, the condominiums also had possibility to participate in this program, and they have even more higher rate of compensation than population. It can be, for example, 40% or even 60%, depends on the scheme of implementing energy efficiency measures. So the savings of condominiums were about 20% of heat. Natural gas, it's about 10%, and electricity, approximately 9% per month per building. And as for individuals, the main results were saving of natural gas at the level of 30%, or nearly 90 cubic meters per month per home. So it's really, with regard to the prices of natural gas, heat, electricity, it's a real savings, good savings. As for ESCO mechanism for the public sector, today we have, we have just, we implemented this mechanism only a few years ago. And today we already have more than 500 ESCO agreements, which have been concluded in 57 cities on the amount at 1.25 billion hryvnias. So here you can see the dynamics of concluding the contracts, ESCO contracts. And as you can see, in 2020, we have a decrease and a decline in the number of these contracts, which can be explained by the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, the interruptions in economic activity, lockdowns, and so on. As for program sufficiency, we already have 60 million hryvnias of savings and 35,000 gigacalories of heat savings, according to this mechanism. Well, as for the industrial enterprises, we have the decarbonization fund, due to which have incomes from the annual from the CO2 emissions tax. And in 2019, 2020, this tax, the incomes from this tax increased from 50 million hryvnias to almost 1 billion hryvnia. And of course, this money should be spent purposefully, so not to be corrupted or something like that. However, none of the current budget programs supports reducing CO2 emissions by implementing energy efficient projects, and therefore the decarbonization fund means will be exclusively spent on projects aimed at improving energy efficiency and reducing CO2 emissions, carbon emissions. Well, and some information about the renewable energy promotion in Ukraine. Today we have several instruments to encourage implementing renewable energy technologies in Ukraine as for industrial entities and population. They are feed-in tariffs, and this is the main instrument, the key instrument for Ukraine, because today we have the highest level of feed-in tariffs in Europe. What is feed-in tariff? This is a tariff that the government suggests to the producers of green energy, and as a price of producing this green energy. Yeah? And these producers who generate this green energy, they can sell this green electricity at higher prices and earn money and make money on this business. So today we have feed-in tariffs for households, for private households and industrial entities. And due to this, actually every citizen in Ukraine can make money on green energy, if of course he or she has money to invest in this green energy business. The next instrument is allowances to the feed-in tariff for using domestic equipment for green power plants construction, different privileges like for land tax, custom duties, and value-added tax for the domestic equipment on green power plants construction. The last year there are a lot of conversations and discussions in the government concerning the green oceans introduction instead of feed-in tariffs. And of course, we have commercial bank loans for construction green energy facilities and every citizen or every firm can apply for. Here you can see the dynamics, the results of promotion renewable energy in Ukraine. And here you can see that we have the tremendous growth in the installed capacity of green energy generation facilities during the last 3 years, 2018, 2020. And even pandemic, COVID-19 didn't stop us from rising the installed capacity of our renewable energy industry. Here you can see the situation in 2021, and this is the structure of the renewable energy installed capacities in Ukraine. Here you can see that the biggest share we have for the industrial solar energy. The second place is for wind energy generation, and the third is for the home solar energy. And if we add, for example, industrial solar and home solar, we got about 80% of green energy, solar energy, in the total structure of renewable energy mix. So it's a really high level. And many economists tell about the problem concerning these imbalances, because the solar energy has the highest feed-in tariff. And this is the explanation why we have so high level of solar energy facilities. See, because it's more profitable than the other types of renewable energy in Ukraine. Here you can see the illustration of the dynamics of solar power plants in Ukrainian households, of course. Yeah. So here you can see the number of facilities, how they grew through the recent years. Especially we have the increase during the last 3 years, 2019 and 2021, and the same with installed capacity. I should say that it's interesting because in 2020, the primary growth in the number of installed capacity of facilities was the highest for the industrial green energy facilities, and in 2021, the primary growth of the installed capacities was for the home photovoltaic solar power plants. Why is it so? Because in 2020, even despite the pandemic, the green energy sector in Ukraine continued to grow on inertia. But in 2021, there were some changes in the feed-in tariff for industrial facilities. The feed-in tariff was decreased, but not for the home facilities. And because of this, we had in 2021 the growth of the home solar energy facilities. Actually, we have the gradual increase in the installed green energy capacity, in particular by 21% during the crisis year 2020. However, during the last years, in 2017 and 2021, the green electricity generation increased more than 6 times. And we had around 10,000 megawatts as of January 1st, 2022. However, even if we have this tremendous and huge growth in the installed capacities of green energy facilities, we still have a low share of renewables in electricity production. Here you can see the dynamics of the share starting from the year of introducing the feed-in tariff until 2020. And here you can see the share of renewables in the electricity production in 2021. So here you can see that in 2021, we have 8.1%. In 2020, we have 8.3%. So in 2021, we have a decline in the share of renewables in electricity production. I think it's due to the pandemic, some lockdowns, some interruptions in the investment process, and so on. Here you can see the energy intensity of GDP. In order to compare the successes of Ukraine in the renewable energy sphere and the results in energy intensity. You can see the statistics for almost 30 years on energy intensity, and the peaks of this indicator were observed during the 1990s after the Soviet Union collapse. And after that years, we have the gradual decline in the amount of energy efficiency of intensity of GDP. However, in 2020, we had the level of energy intensity at 0.189 and it's around 40% or even 50% higher than the world average indicator. If we compare, for example, Ukrainian energy intensity GDP with Polish one or Germany, these indicators will be twice or even 3 times lower. So we have a real problem with our energy intensity, and we need to do everything to decline it. And few words about the impact of the Russian-Ukrainian war on energy efficiency and renewable energy sectors in Ukraine. They are the following. First, we have the loan programs on implementing energy efficiency and renewable energy projects for the population businesses closed. Then we have the reduction of feed-in tariff payments for green energy producers, and today actually we have the regulation acts that proclaim that state will pay only from 15 to 60% of the level of feed-in tariff pre-war to the solar energy facilities, so 15%, and about 60% of the tariff for the biomass power plants. Also, we have some regulatory restrictions on the operations of renewable energy facilities due to the discreteness of their energy generation, because today Ukraine does only the first steps to implement the energy storage facilities, and actually solar energy plants, wind energy plants, and others have no these energy storage facilities, and it's a really problem for the united energy system of Ukraine to balance these inflexible renewable energy facilities. Also, we have destruction of green power capacities. Today, renewable energy assets worth more than $5.5 billion in the war zone, and other green energy assets worth nearly $4 billion in neighboring areas are under the threat of destroying. Last lecture, Professor Melnik announced that there are a lot of destruction of renewable energy facilities in Ukraine, especially in Kharkiv region, Kherson region, and others. For example, in Kharkiv region, 100% of green energy capacities are destroyed. It's awful. And of course, we need to renew all these facilities and try to construct more and more green energy plants. Also, green energy generation by wind farms in Ukraine have been reduced 3 times compared to the same period in 2021, and by solar capacities by 40%. It's, of course, it's a very huge decline in energy production, energy generation by green power facilities. So what we have today, actually? Today we have reducing feed-in tariff rates that decrease the role of this instrument in renewable energy development in Ukraine, because according to the planned by our government stages of declining feed-in tariff, we will have several steps in declining feed-in tariffs, and the feed-in tariff will end in 2029. So we have now a lot of time to to use actually this feed-in tariff. However, rising electricity prices motivate energy producers to become prosumers. What does it mean? It means that population, or business entities who construct green energy plants and generate green energy, they can consume this energy because the electricity prices are really high, and because of this, they can save their money. And it will be more profitable as the electricity prices will rise. And these changes necessitate updating the government levers to develop the industry and create a favorable investment climate after the war. So today we have different opportunities to renew after the war, of course, our green energy industry, to use more rational strategy to balance the different renewable energy technologies for Ukraine, and to implement new renewable energy technologies in order to involve all different technologies that we have today, and maybe to change a lot the structure of economic instruments to motivate this industry. So thank you. That's all for today, because we are run out of time actually, and I would be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you, Iryna. That was fabulous. That was really, really interesting.
Do you have any questions?
So I guess anybody that has a question could either type it into the chat or simply unmute themselves and ask the question. Well, while we're waiting for people to unmute themselves or raise their hands or type something in the chat, let me ask you something, Iryna. So I know that in 2021, the winds in the North Sea and in the Baltic that essentially generate a lot of wind power for the Norwegians and the Germans and the Danish, they were very weak, weaker than usual. And so the production of wind, in those areas really fell. Was that the same in Ukraine, or was there another reason for the fact that the generation from wind went down in 2021?
Actually, for many years, we have a wind generation. And the proportion of wind energy and solar energy was in favor of wind energy. So we have less, maybe even installed capacities of wind energy plants, but we have more generated energy from wind energy. Today, I think the situation has changed because we have a real boom of solar energy in the household sector. And due to this, we have the increase in the solar energy generation. So I think it's not too impacted, it's not affected too much by the maybe winds, but just this proportion, solar and wind energy.
So I'm assuming that when people put up the solar panels on the rooftop or on the balcony or whatever, they can engage in net metering, meaning that if they don't use all of the electricity that they generate, they can put the excess into the grid, correct?
Actually, we have a mechanism when green energy producer, for example, households or somebody else, they can consume the generated energy and will sell only the remains of this energy generated. Yeah. So, but as for the net metering system in its classical variant, we have no such right now. It's something like this, but it's not the clear net metering system. And there are some discussions how to implement it in the right way.
Very interesting. So another question for you, Iryna. There is a question from the audience. And so do you see it, Iryna?
Yeah, please tell me what in your opinion might be, might be the first steps of rebuilding our energy infrastructure. I think it's possible to become 100% green energy country. I think that Anna talked about it. You recommended some steps what to do after the war. Yeah. So renewables, as I say, so reduce the energy intensity of GDP, you told, yeah. What else? To refuse from the district heating, yeah, and maybe apply for electric heating. But I think it's discussable question with regard to our climate features. Well, actually, as for the 100% of green energy country, maybe it might be possible, but it requires a lot of money that we don't have right now. But who knows, maybe in the future we will have technologies, renewable energy technologies, sufficiently cheap to implement them. Maybe Anna, you can add something?
Yes, I noticed that there's somebody who raised their hand, so I'll keep it short. So one thing that we need to keep in mind is that as we've seen in the world, it's not something that you can do overnight. You cannot change the entire structure of your energy system overnight. And so I hate to say this, but maybe the war provides an opportunity for reconstruction that is really geared toward that, but we also don't want to expect miracles. I'll raise another topic a little bit later about, agriculture and generation of renewables in agricultural land, but I'll raise that to later. We have a question from Anastasia Yaremenko. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So Anastasia, please go ahead.
Yeah, you're correct. I have a question. If I'm not mistaken, EU countries still use Russian gas. And recently I heard a news that Poland is going to cancel the transportation of gas through pipes that are located on the territory of Poland. And my question is, what does it really mean for EU countries? Can this Poland agreement speed up EU countries to refuse Russian gas? And there is any other way for EU countries to transfer gas not from Ukraine pipes and not from Poland pipes? Thank you.
So who is this question for?
For you, if you can.
Oh, for me. Okay. So what I know from Poland is that first of all, my understanding was that actually Russia decided to suspend shipments to Poland. And Poland said, well, guess what? We're going to go and talk to Norway. And apparently they signed a deal with Norway. Don't forget that Norway is a big time producer of natural gas and oil because they have the North Sea and the sources. And there are pipelines going from the North Sea, from Norway, essentially, or the Norway portion of the North Sea to Europe. And so I think that the Polish are going to be relying on that. I know that other countries are doing what they can to secure supplies from alternative, non-belligerent and non-unfair countries. I know that Italy, for example, has been in discussions with Algeria to boost the imports from that particular country. And there is a pipeline that connects North Africa and Algeria, I believe, in particular to Italy and to Europe. I know that the Germans, and this is something that I haven't read in the newspaper, I just saw it on TV about 2 months ago when the war had recently started, and then I tuned into the German news, the German TV. I know that the Germans have been talking to Qatar, which turns out to be actually a fairly productive producer of natural gas. And so all of the different countries are trying to realign their supplies. I think these countries are also realizing that this is really the time to boost renewables. Don't forget that many of the policies that Iryna described for Ukraine have been in place for a long, long time in the European countries. So in Germany, for instance, the feed-in tariffs for solar are very generous. Almost too generous, considering that I don't believe that there's actually that much sun in Germany, but they also do produce a lot of wind energy. And so, and a lot of the other countries, like Italy included, have had feed-in tariffs in place. So I think this is going to be the time that the EU countries are really going to sit down and boost their efforts to turn to renewables. With the complications that renewables have, renewables require the ability to accommodate for intermittent type of production. They require the ability to store, so for electricity storage. So it's not necessarily an easy transition, but I think they're going to have to buckle down and do it, because otherwise they're going to be in trouble.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Anna, I do have a question. This is Anne.
Yeah,
I may have missed it. Carbon taxes within the EU.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's a possibility that some of that, if there are more carbon taxes, that some of that revenue or incentives would somehow benefit Ukraine in the future?
This is a good question, because the European Union doesn't have a carbon tax that applies to all of the member states. So the European Union has the emissions trading system, which is very broad, involves just about everybody, and generates a substantial amount of revenue, which is usually funneled to funding projects that are aimed at renewables and this kind of stuff. they could certainly try to use some of these revenues to finance, Ukraine. By the way, I don't have this picture. I wish I had a graph to show you. But this is something that I teach in my climate change class. The prices of the permits on the European trading system has been, at times incredibly low, to the point that the European Union had to do some interventions to try to up the price of the permits. Remember that you don't want the price of the permits to be too low, because if it's too low, there's no incentive for the companies to invest and innovate and find ways to cut down emissions. So you want it sufficiently high. But right now, it's at levels that have never been seen before. We're talking about 95, 100 euro per ton, which is, it's never been seen like this before, which is kind of interesting. Certainly, they could use that. This generates absolutely revenues, which could be used to help Ukraine. As a reminder, the European Union has a rule whereby if you have to impose taxes that apply to all of the member states, you have to have anonymity. Excuse me, not anonymity, but unanimity of votes, for this to be done. So they don't have a carbon tax because they've never been able to achieve this unanimous type of consensus. But individual countries do. So Sweden has a carbon tax, Finland has a carbon tax, other countries have a carbon tax, but it's not a EU-wide type of thing.
Can I add something? Some
Yeah.
information? Well, actually, Ukraine participated in emission trading a few years ago within the Kyoto Protocol, if I'm not mistaken, but we have a lot of money. We received a lot of money, but due to our corruption schemes, Ukraine was banned to participate in this trading for several years, it seems to me, due to corruption. So we got a lot of money, but we didn't spend them on right things. So this is a problem. Yeah, it's Ukraine. So.
Well, but if Ukraine joins the European Union, and I know that it's applied, and I know that this thing is going to be given serious consideration during the summer, but then if it joins the European Union, then automatically, presumably, the trading system will apply to Ukraine as well. So that would be so maybe this prohibition from participating will be dropped as a consequence.
I hope so.
I think that's one of the concerns also with the loss of revenue from agricultural exports. I wonder how the country or how the rest of the world will come together to try to fill that gap. And that's one of the things I'm concerned about, to see, it's not just military support, but financial and then energy support too. And as Vitaly said, it's like the beginning. So we'll, yeah.
That's a good point. And by the way, I guess the United Nations and the food program in the United Nations, they have been exhorting for reopening of the ports on the Black Sea, because that's how the grains and all of the agricultural products, produce get delivered to the nations that need them. So we'll see if that works out. So Iryna, I have a question for you, and that's a question for Vitaly as well. So I know that in other countries, like in Italy, for example, when they started giving out these substantial subsidies for people to set up their solar panels, a lot of farmers that had relatively unproductive lands actually decided to put up solar farms on their lands, because that was actually more profitable than growing anything. The lands weren't that great, I guess. What would be the story for something like that in Ukraine? Ukraine obviously is a big agricultural producer. It's well known for what Vitaly calls the black soil and all this kind of stuff. Do you think that there could be a point in which there's going to be competition between growing food or growing plants that provide food and putting up solar panels?
Well, we have today we even applied for a project and a research project on agrivoltaic, when we can install solar panels and when we can use the land for agricultural purposes. So it's like a combination of it. So it's one way to do. Another one, when we can and we have this practice for some areas when we install solar panels instead of use this land for agricultural purposes, if they really was not a high fertility. Okay, and one more thing, we have some projects for installing solar panels, for example, in Chernobyl zone. So because this land we can't use for any purposes, actually, but why not for solar panels? So these are ideas, and I think it might be implemented in the nearest future.
Very good. So I like this idea of utilizing the exclusion zone, I guess, in Chernobyl for producing electricity. So I have another question for you and maybe for Vitaly as well. So I regret that in all of these years, I haven't been able to have a research project dedicated to improving energy efficiency in agriculture. So agriculture actually does use a lot of energy if you think about it. You know, there's electrical equipment, there's agricultural machinery like, you know, tractors and combines and all this kind of stuff, which I presume run on diesel. And I wonder whether, first of all, you know, your assessment of how energy efficient the machinery and the entire production process in agriculture is in Ukraine, and whether there's room in the future for improving this, you know, perhaps, you know, through government intervention or modernizing techniques and everything. I'm not an agricultural expert, and somebody told me that actually the agriculture in Ukraine is very high tech. So that might not be, you know, at the place where we necessarily want to do much, but you guys are the expert, and I don't really know that much about agriculture in Ukraine.
Vitaly, maybe you can ask, or you can answer, or maybe I first. Well, what I know about the agriculture energy intensity is that we have big agrarian holders, big organizations, and small farmers. And as for small farmers, of course, they have no much money to buy really high-tech equipment, and of course, their energy intensity a bit lower. But as for big organizations in agrarian sector, they have a lot of modern contemporary equipment to be really energy efficient. So as I've not studied this question properly, I can't say is it really high energy intensity or no, but in comparison to small farmers and big farmers holdings, of course, the big organizations are more energy efficient.
Good to know.
Yes, and even from Kherson region, a lot of agrarian equipment was robbed. So this region was robbed by Russian occupiers, and they just got all this equipment, modern equipment, and just moved it to Russia. So it's awful, but this is the level maybe of Ukraine in comparison to Russia.
So actually, this is chit-chatting. This is not a very technical or professional type of conversation, but the fact that the Russians were stealing agricultural equipment, so we're talking about tractors and combines, has been covered in the news here. And they were pointing out that these are John Deere type of equipment, which apparently come with, you can actually track where they are. They have a GPS tracker so that the Ukrainians, you know, knew exactly who was taking the equipment and where it was going. But also they can be disabled remotely, so that by the time it's made it, you know, its way into Russian, the Russians are not able to use it because they cannot start it because it's been disabled. So I don't know if this is nice for me to say, but I got a good, I hate the fact that the Russians have taken this, but I got some consolation from the fact that at least they're not able to use the equipment. I don't know, Anne, if you knew, if you heard about this.
Yes, I heard about this. I heard that some equipment was transported to Chechnya, and it was blocked remotely, and the Russians cannot unblocked it. Yeah, unlocked it. And they said that if they can't do this, they will use it as a spare parts. That's all. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, any questions from the audience or clarifications?
Maybe not.
So Iryna, would
Yeah.
you like to say a few, would you like to talk about maybe the next
Yes.
presentations that are part of the series?
Sure, let me just a second, give me a second. So I would like to announce the next lecture, next Friday on May 20th. Yeah, it will be Vitaly Dankevich with the lecture on the impact of the war in Ukraine on global food security. So we are going to meet next Friday. I will send later, closer to the date, the link to this lecture from Vitaly. Maybe Vitaly will do it. And I invite everybody to participate in our next lecture. And thank you for today's meeting.